Hi, my name is Ezra Michel, and I'm a trans person. And today's Trans Day of Visibility. Here I am, being a visible trans person, and I'm here to talk to you about that. I walk through the world and most people wouldn't assume that I'm trans. And that means that I get treated differently than somebody who would walk through the world and be seen as a trans person. I have a different experience than somebody who doesn't have the same privilege as me. Meaning that my perspective on this whole thing is going to be very different from somebody else's perspective who has different circumstances than I do. I've had access to surgery, hormones, very handsome and very cute, which also is another privilege. I think that all of that added up together allows me to be quite joyful about being trans. Not to say that if you don't have these things that you won't be able to find joy in being trans. It's just that these things are things that helped me a lot. And I think it's important to acknowledge that this is what I'm working with, and this is how I've, gotten to where I am. Which is why I don't think we should be comparing ourselves to each other. We all have different experiences, and though if you identify as trans, we are all part of this trans community as a whole. We're all so different from each other, and we all have so many different variables and things that we go through in our lives that make us experience being trans so differently from each other. I came out at 18 years old. I wanted to come out when I was 17, and I tried to, but it didn't work because I wasn't very confident in my identity at the time. And when I tried to come out, folks around me didn't believe me. I have always been quite flamboyant, let's just say. And even when I was presenting pretty masculine, back in high school I had really short hair. I dressed in all boys' clothes from the boys section, whatever. And, I identified as lesbian, but for some reason, because of my personality and the way that and my mannerisms and the way that I speak, when I came out to my friend group, they just didn't believe me. They just were like, no. And that, I think, is due to representation and visibility. Back then, the only visible trans people that I knew of were folks who were really butch. And when they came out as trans, everyone was just sort of like, oh yeah, that makes sense. Yeah, that checks out. You fit the stereotype of what a typical man looks like in the world. A stereotypical cisgender hetero man would look like and sound like. Therefore, sure, you're a guy, whatever. But for me, because I was like, I'm a man, they were like, oh, sweetie, no, you're not. So I went back in the closet. When I came out at 18, it was because I saw somebody at a party who was just so interesting. His name was Andrew, I remember. He had been on testosterone for a few months. His voice had dropped, he had facial hair happening, and he was wearing a dress. And he was talking about being trans and being a trans man. And I was like, excuse me, hi. What? You're allowed to do that? And he was like, there aren't any rules. I was super wasted, and I just collapsed in the middle of this college party. It was my first big college party, and I just sat there crying in the middle of the floor, being like, I'm trans. From that moment on, I just couldn't stay in the closet. I had to come out. This is why visibility matters so much. Because when I came out at 17 as a feminine man to my queer group of friends, they knew what trans was at the time and still weren't able to accept that I was a trans man because of the way that I talk and act. I went back in the closet until I saw myself in somebody else. That's how important visibility is in our community. I saw Andrew in that dress, on testosterone, with a beard and a deep voice, and I said, oh my God. I didn't know I was allowed to do that. I didn't know that was allowed. I didn't know that I could exist until I saw him. That's not nothing. So when I'm visible as a trans, masculine, feminine person who is bisexual and proud of his top surgery scars, I'm saying, hey, trans can also be this. I'm adding to the pile. So that's why visibility matters so much to me, because until I was able to see myself in somebody else, I didn't feel safe coming out. I didn't feel safe declaring who I was, because I didn't know that who I was could exist. Now, I'm not saying that after I met Andrew and I started testosterone that everything was easy for me, because it wasn't. I went through so much unlearning my own internalized transphobia and femphobia, and I'm still doing that to this day. You know, I thought I wanted to be stealth for the first few years of my transition. I was also in my active alcoholism and drug addiction when I started my transition, so I don't even remember the first few years of my transition. I don't remember my voice dropping. I don't remember my first beard hair. I don't remember those things. I didn't document much. So the few pictures that I do have are very, very important to me, because my memories are so foggy. But that's beside the point. What I'm trying to say is, it wasn't easy for me to get to this place of wanting to be visible. Even though I knew that people like Andrew were valid and could exist, I still had to learn that for myself. He inspired me to come out, but his visibility didn't stop me from experiencing all of the internalized shame and transphobia and femphobia that I already had inside of me. That took years of work to unpack all of that shit. And I'm still doing it to this day. I am not fully cooked. I am not healed. I am not cured. I still struggle with so much shame. But sharing my story and being vulnerable and visible on social media and in the world has been so healing and has lessened my anxiety so much. Because every time that I talk about being trans, openly and honestly, I'm telling myself that I deserve to talk about this. I'm telling myself that who I am shouldn't be hidden. These are really beautiful things to tell yourself. These are really beautiful things to tell myself. And I'm telling myself these things through action. It's not just me saying, oh yeah, I'm deserving of whatever. I deserve love. I deserve visibility. I deserve to feel like I don't have to hide. Yeah, I can say that till the cows come home. But acting as if that is true is a completely different thing. Being visible and talking about my transness openly is acting as if I deserve it, even if my brain tells me that I don't. Because I still struggle with this internalized transphobia. I still struggle with this feeling that I am somehow broken or flawed. But acting as if I'm not is teaching me that I'm not. I couldn't have done this by myself. After years of thinking that I wanted to be stealth, I ended up getting sober, and in my sobriety, I began talking about my transition in rooms of recovery. I started opening up to people that I previously would assume would be uncomfortable with me talking about my transness, and they ended up loving me more and appreciating my vulnerability and honesty, even if they couldn't relate to my transness. And that taught me something. It taught me that, maybe I am lovable. And slowly but surely, I started feeling more and more comfortable speaking about it. And I started meeting other trans folks who felt similarly. I met somebody named Stevenson Brooks, who is an amazing trans woman. She was one of the first people that I met who was
proud to be trans, who talked about it as if it wasn't this awful thing. And I related to that at the time. And we started having these conversations, and I ended up going back to this support group called Lisa's Place in Santa Barbara. I started frequenting that support group every week. I couldn't get enough of it. It was so fun for me to be able to talk about being trans for the first time in my entire transition. And then I ended up facilitating that support group. I started meeting people in my community. I became very active. I started realizing that if I continue doing my work to unlearn my own internalized shame about my gender and my transness, I could be of service to so many more people than just myself. I started being able to help other people through challenges that I had faced during my early days of transition, and it became something so much bigger than myself. It feels so good to be a part of something that's bigger than just me. After I started getting more active in the Santa Barbara trans community, I got an offer from the director of the LGBT Center here in LA to perform at Trans Pride LA, and I accepted, and it was the most amazing experience. I performed a couple original songs. I took my shirt off on stage. I met Alexandra Billings, and my life changed so dramatically after meeting her. We met in the green room backstage after my performance, and I ran up to her, and we were the only two people in the dressing room, and I said, "Oh my God, I feel high, and I haven't been high in 9 months." And she was like, "That's a long time." And I was like, "It is a long time." And she gave me her phone number and told me to call her or text her anytime. And I thought for a moment, oh my God, she's just saying that. And then she looked at me and she was like, "I mean it." And I was like, I think she means it. And she meant it. She really meant it. And that changed my life. Somebody who saw me being Ezra, being free, changed my life. I felt so seen by her. I felt safe. I ended up starting to have a relationship with her that became one of the most important relationships that I have in my entire life. To be loved by another trans person, to be supported, to be seen, was so profound. I felt safe. I felt secure. I felt like I wasn't alone. And even though I had been a part of the community for a little while at that point, I still felt like I needed somebody who could be a beacon for me. And she was that for me. She told me stories about the early days of her transition. She told me history. She taught me about films that were so important to the queer community. She taught me so many things, and she continues to. She shares our history with me, history that I would never know if I didn't know her, if we didn't talk. That's another reason why visibility is so important to me. You know, we always say, like, we need to honor our trans ancestors, the ones who've come before, the ones who died in the battle of fighting for our rights as trans individuals. But there are still so many trans folks who are still alive, who fought those fights. They're still here fighting and thriving. Intergenerational communication within our trans community is so powerful. We need to connect to our history. We need to know where we came from. Where we come from is so beautiful. We come from such a lineage of survival and strength, perseverance, resilience. There's so much beauty in the fight that we fought. I wouldn't know much about it if I hadn't started talking to trans folks who've come before me, who are still here. We have to love the trans people in our lives who are still here, just as much as we need to honor those who've passed on. That being said, I'm visible because I can be. It matters to me because I matter. And I want to be somebody that I needed when I was younger. I want to be that beacon for others. And I am. I get messages every single day from folks in our community who tell me that my visibility inspires them, that they feel seen, that they feel like they're allowed to be effeminate, trans, masculine folks, that their gender is valid. It's happening already. I'm doing what I want to be doing. And all I have to do is be myself. That's the most beautiful thing I've ever said. I don't want anyone to interpret this as me suggesting that you need to be visible in order to contribute good to our community. That's not what I'm saying. Be yourself. Do what you feel is right for you. This is what feels right for me. And I'm interested in trans folks feeling free as possible. And for me, freedom looks like talking about being trans on the internet and making jokes about it and laughing about it and writing songs about it and making videos about it. That's freedom for me. We all get to figure out what freedom means for us as individuals. And to those trans folks who are not out yet, we are here when you're ready. We love you already. I love you already. You know, we still have very far to go. We have so much to do. We have so many fights to fight still. Our laws being passed, attempting to not let trans individuals play sports, laws that are attempting to stop trans youth from getting gender-affirming care, life-saving gender-affirming care. There's so much to do. We have so far to go. And we've come so far. We know what we're doing. We know how to fight this fight. We've been fighting it for a long time. I have a lot of hope. And I look to our community as one of the most beautiful, magnificent, majestic things that exists. We are so resilient. We are so powerful. And I'm so proud to be trans. Happy Trans Day of Visibility, everybody. I love you so much. I love you so much.